Hi students, welcome to HSC Earth and Environmental Science. This is Module 6 on hazards and video number 11. It's the beginning of a little mini-series on climatic phenomena and ecosystems, and this first one will focus on hailstorms. The learning intention for this video is for you to evaluate the causes and impact of climate phenomena on a local ecosystem. And as I said, this one's going to focus on hailstorms. So we need to be able to describe the cause of hailstorms and then to describe and or evaluate the impact of hailstorms on our local environment. So this begins a little series on climatic phenomena that we're going to be looking at over the next series of videos, and they're going to be a number of different types of potential hazards which could of course lead to disasters that we're going to look at in relation to the climate. This is going to include hailstorms, which is the subject of this video, east coast lows, droughts and floods, and bushfires. And we've had some experience with all of these in recent times. So let's have a look at hailstorms. Well, any thunderstorm that produces hail that reaches the ground is known as a hailstorm. So this is a very broad category, and basically hail is anything that has a diameter of greater than about 5 millimeters or half a centimeter. Now, of course, this is the lower limit. Hail can be much bigger than this, and hailstones have been recorded up to and even above 15 centimeters in diameter. So we're talking some fairly large and very potentially damaging solid ice that is going to fall from the sky and often reach quite significant speeds. But unlike ice pellets or sleet, hailstones are often layered, and they can be irregular and clumped together, and so sometimes you can see that they don't look like nice, neat crystals of ice. They just look like great big lumps, sometimes lumps with smaller lumps within them. So what happens when you're looking at hail formation? So what we're looking at is hail formation in warmer weather. So there's actually a kind of an effect that reduces the chances of hail forming in cool weather. So what we have to have is frozen water droplets swept up by currents within a thundercloud. And often you can see these clouds take on quite a greenish tinge when you can see that a hailstorm is headed your way. The supercooled moisture freezes onto the droplet surface, and that forms just that little layer of ice. Solid ice is going to respond to gravity, and it's going to start to fall. But the currents that are operating within clouds can circulate those little droplets, those little ice crystals, and then they sort of move up and down. You can see this kind of irregular pattern of rising and falling, falling under gravity, rising under currents that we get happening to each of these little hailstones. And each time they go up, an extra little layer of ice is going to be added. And so this is why we often see this layered structure when we look a little more closely at hailstones. The hail will eventually reach a size that can't be held anymore. Gravity is just going to eventually pull it out of the clouds, and you're going to end up with a hailstorm. So where does it form? Well, as I mentioned, hail is predominantly a phenomenon of warm weather, and we don't tend to see it happening quite so much in the colder weather. So we're thinking of hailstorms, we're thinking of the summer months usually in southeast Australia, where we have these hailstorms most likely to occur. They tend to move from inland towards the coast, so they're coming for us from the west towards the east, and of course this would be driven by westerlies, and we talk about winds as being their origin, not where they're blowing to. So a wind that's coming from the west and blowing towards the east to the coast on the eastern side of Australia, that's going to be a westerly. The southern half of coastal New South Wales is particularly affected by these types of storms, and as I mentioned, you can often tell clouds that are potentially going to carry hail into your area by their greenish colour. You can really see that sort of change in the nature of the storm clouds that are approaching you if they're carrying hail. Now, the important thing is not just how does hail form, but what impact does it have on the local ecosystems? And of course, we can work through a little bit of a checklist here of quite a lot of things that could be potential impacts on the local ecosystem. Often this is very much, and it would make sense too, that this is dependent on the size of the hailstones. It's also dependent on the time of the fall. Okay, so do we have a short burst, or do we have a longer period of time over which these hailstones are falling to earth? Sometimes hail begins, if you can quickly see that it's coming, you get your cars and things under cover, then you can often prevent any major damage from occurring. But sometimes this can occur very quickly, last long enough for you to have significant damage, and we'll look at that too as part of these impacts. So one of the things that can happen, obviously, is that large bits, chunks of solid ice banging into plants, depending on the type of plant, particularly if it's a soft leaf plant. So these soft leaf plants tend to not do so well with hailstorms, especially if you have winds accompanying them. That can really smash into them and do some major damage. And of course, if this is part of an agricultural area, then that can wipe out large crops and do some significant damage to the farmers in those areas. We know that plants are also the basis of all ecosystems. They are the source, the autotrophs, the source of conversion of sunlight or the light energy into organic compounds for herbivores and ultimately for carnivores and all other organisms that are part of those food chains. And so therefore damage to the plants can create greater problems as we look at the wider ecosystem. But heavy enough hailstorms can bring down trees, or at least tree branches, can destroy plants and crops and damage flower beds. In addition to this, there can actually be some stripping of the branches or the leaves from larger trees, and sometimes those branches, when they come down, can do some quite significant damage. In 1999, there was a significant hailstorm in Sydney, and this particular hailstorm damaged homes, cars and businesses, and the damage bill came in at over $600 million. But in addition to that, a large number of people are obviously putting in insurance claims, and the amount of insurance claims was believed to be in the vicinity of $1.7 billion. So we've got an over $2 billion damage bill caused by hailstorms. So this can be the potential impact. Obviously, this is a local ecosystem, which is where we live, even if it's an urban kind of environment, can have devastating effects. And now we're starting to sort of move into that realm from hazard to disaster. But we're not in Sydney, we're up on beautiful Port Stephens. But even in Port Stephens, we can't avoid these hailstorms. One of the most recent occurred in 2018, and you might remember that particular one. In the April 2018 hailstorm, we had a lot of damage in the areas around Nelson Bay and Anna Bay, and the state emergency services based in Tomaree were dealing with more than 100 jobs on that Sunday morning after the storms had passed through. What do you remember of this storm? Maybe you were living in the area at the time, maybe you were somewhere else because the storms moved through the coast. It actually included some quite significant damage from further south to Sydney, for example. But what can you remember of the impact on the local environment? That's something that we'll have a bit more of a look at in class, gives us a chance to sort of analyse exactly how a particular storm like this one can impact on our own local environment. And that's a very important part of this particular area of study. Thanks for watching.